The small town of Millbrook had never produced anyone famous. It was the kind of place where nothing exciting ever happened. People woke up, went to work, came home, and repeated the same routine every single day. The streets were quiet, the shops closed early, and dreams rarely grew bigger than the town limits. In this ordinary place lived a 12-year-old girl named Maya Chun. She was thin, with dark hair that always seemed slightly messy, and eyes that looked too serious for someone her age. Maya lived with her grandmother in a tiny house at the end of Pine Street. The house was old and needed repairs, but they could not afford them. Her grandmother worked as a cleaner at the local school, earning barely enough to pay for food and electricity. Maya's mother had left when she was just 3 years old. Nobody talked about why she left or where she went. Her father had died in a factory accident 2 years later. So Maya grew up with her grandmother, a woman of few words but endless love. Their life was simple and sometimes difficult. They did not have a television, a computer, or any modern gadgets. What they did have was an old piano that sat in the corner of their living room. It had belonged to Maya's grandfather, who had passed away before she was born. The piano was scratched, some keys were yellow with age, and it was slightly out of tune. But to Maya, it was the most precious thing in the world. Nobody knew when Maya had started playing. Her grandmother remembered finding her at the piano when she was barely 4 years old, pressing the keys with her tiny fingers. She had never been taught. There was no money for lessons and no teachers in Millbrook anyway. But somehow Maya could play. She would listen to songs on the old radio her grandmother kept in the kitchen, and then she would walk to the piano and play them perfectly. At first, her grandmother thought it was just coincidence. Maybe Maya had heard the songs before and memorized them. But as years passed, it became clear that something extraordinary was happening. Maya could hear any piece of music just once and reproduce it exactly on the piano. She could play complex compositions that took trained pianists years to master. And she could do it all without ever seeing a single sheet of music. Maya never talked about her gift. She was a quiet girl who kept to herself. At school, she sat in the back of the class and rarely spoke. The other children thought she was strange. They made fun of her old clothes and her worn-out shoes. They laughed at her messy hair and the fact that she never had money for the cafeteria. Maya would just look at them with those serious eyes and say nothing. She had learned early in life that words often made things worse. So she stayed silent, did her homework, and waited for the day to end so she could go home and play her piano. Every evening, after finishing her chores and helping her grandmother with dinner, Maya would sit at the piano and play for hours. The music filled their small house and spilled out into the street. Neighbors would sometimes stop and listen, wondering where such beautiful sounds were coming from. But they never investigated. People in Millbrook minded their own business. They had their own problems to worry about. So Maya's talent remained a secret, known only to her grandmother and the walls of their old house. Things might have stayed this way forever if not for what happened on that cold November morning. The Millbrook School was preparing for its annual talent show. It was not a big event by any standard. Just a few students singing songs, some doing magic tricks, and maybe 1 or 2 playing instruments badly. The prizes were small, just ribbons and certificates. But for the students of Millbrook, it was the most exciting thing that happened all year. The music teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was in charge of organizing the show. She was a tired woman in her 50s who had given up on finding any real talent in this town long ago. Every year she would sit through the same mediocre performances, clap politely, and hand out participation ribbons. She expected nothing different this year, but the principal had given her strict instructions. A visitor was coming to the talent show this year, Mr. Robert Harrison, a wealthy businessman who had grown up in Millbrook and moved away decades ago, was returning to his hometown. He had made a fortune in the city and now wanted to give back to the community. He was looking for talented young people to support with scholarships. Mrs. Patterson was told to make sure the talent show was impressive. This created a problem. Mrs. Patterson knew there was no impressive talent in her school. The students who usually participated were enthusiastic but not skilled. She needed someone who could actually play an instrument well. She needed someone who could make Millbrook look good in front of this important visitor, and she had no idea where to find such a person. It was during lunch break when Mrs. Patterson overheard a conversation that would change everything. Two teachers were talking in the staff room about strange music they had heard while walking past Pine Street. They described it as the most beautiful piano playing they had ever heard. Mrs. Patterson immediately asked for more details. They told her it came from the old Cheen house at the end of the street. The Chun house, where that quiet girl Maya lived with her grandmother. Mrs. Patterson was skeptical. She had taught music at this school for 20 years and had never noticed any musical ability in Maya Chun. The girl was practically invisible, always sitting in the back, never participating in anything. But Mrs. Patterson was desperate. She decided to visit the Chun house after school and see for herself what these teachers were talking about. That afternoon, she walked down Pine Street and knocked on the door of the old house. Maya's grandmother answered. Looking surprised to see a teacher at her door, Mrs. Patterson explained that she was looking for participants for the school talent show and had heard there might be a piano player living here. The grandmother's face changed. She looked nervous, almost scared. She glanced back into the house and then looked at Mrs. Patterson with uncertainty. After a long moment of silence, she stepped aside and invited the teacher in. What Mrs. Patterson was about to witness would shake everything. She thought she knew about talent and where it could be found. Mrs. Patterson stepped into the Chun house and immediately noticed how small and simple it was. The furniture was old but clean. The walls had no paintings, just a few family photographs in cheap frames. The floor creaked with every step, but her eyes were drawn to the corner of the living room where an old piano stood. It was clearly an antique, with scratches on its wooden surface and keys that had turned yellow over time. Maya was sitting at the piano, frozen, staring at the unexpected visitor with wide eyes. The grandmother introduced Mrs. Patterson and explained why she had come. Maya said nothing. She just looked down at her hands, which were resting on her lap. Mrs. Patterson tried to be friendly. She smiled and told Maya that she had heard wonderful things about her piano playing. She asked if Maya would like to perform at the school talent show. Still, Maya did not speak. The silence in the room grew uncomfortable. The grandmother finally stepped forward and gently placed her hand on Maya's shoulder. She whispered something in her granddaughter's ear. Something Mrs. Patterson could not hear. After what felt like an eternity, Maya slowly nodded. Mrs. Patterson felt relieved. She asked Maya to play something so she could hear for herself. Maya looked at her grandmother, who gave an encouraging nod. Then Maya turned to face the piano. Her small fingers touched the keys, and suddenly the room was filled with music. It was not just any music. It was Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, one of the most difficult pieces ever written for piano. Mrs. Patterson's mouth fell open. She could not believe what she was hearing. The notes flowed perfectly, with emotion and precision that she had never heard from any student in her entire career. Maya played with her eyes closed, completely lost in the music. Her fingers moved across the keys with a speed and grace that seemed impossible for someone her age. When the piece ended, there was complete silence. Mrs. Patterson realized she had been holding her breath. Tears had formed in her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away. She tried to speak but found that words would not come. The grandmother watched her reaction with a mixture of pride and worry. She had always known her granddaughter was special, but she had also feared what might happen if the world discovered Maya's gift. People did not always react kindly to things they did not understand. Mrs. Patterson finally found her voice. She asked Maya where she had learned to play like that. Maya shrugged and said she had never learned. She just heard music and could play it. Mrs. Patterson was confused. She asked about teachers, lessons, music schools. Maya shook her head at each question. The grandmother explained that they had never been able to afford lessons. Maya had taught herself everything by listening to the radio and experimenting on the old piano. Mrs. Patterson could not comprehend this. What Maya had just played required years of formal training. Professional pianists spent decades perfecting such pieces. How could a 12-year-old girl from this forgotten town play it without any instruction? The teacher's mind was racing. She knew she had found something extraordinary. This was not just talent. This was something that appeared once in a generation, maybe once in a lifetime. She had to convince Maya to perform at the talent show. She had to show Mr. Harrison what was hiding in this small town. But she also sensed that Maya was reluctant. The girl was clearly uncomfortable with attention. She had spent her whole life staying invisible, and now someone was asking her to step into the spotlight. Mrs. Patterson chose her words carefully. She explained about Mr. Harrison and the scholarships he was offering. She talked about opportunities that could change Maya's life. A scholarship could mean access to the best music schools in the country. It could mean a future beyond Millbrook, beyond poverty, beyond struggle. The grandmother's eyes lit up at these words. She had always worried about what would happen to Maya after she was gone. She was getting older, and her health was not good. The idea of Maya having a secure future was like a dream she had never dared to have. Maya listened quietly. She looked at her grandmother's hopeful face and felt something shift inside her. She had never cared about fame or success. All she wanted was to play her piano in peace. But she loved her grandmother more than anything in the world. If performing at some school show could help their situation, she would do it. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She said she would participate in the talent show. Mrs. Patterson nearly jumped with joy. She thanked Maya and her grandmother repeatedly. Before leaving, she asked what piece Maya would perform. Maya thought for a moment and said she did not know yet. She would decide later. The news spread through the school like wildfire. Everyone was talking about how Mrs. Patterson had recruited the quiet Chun girl for the talent show. Students who had never paid attention to Maya suddenly became curious. Who was this girl who kept to herself all the time? Could she really play piano? Most people assumed it was a joke or a mistake. They could not imagine that the shy, poorly dressed girl from Pine Street could have any talent worth showing. The days leading up to the talent show were difficult for Maya. She felt the stares and heard the whispers wherever she went. Some students mocked her openly, saying she would embarrass herself on stage. Others made cruel jokes about her clothes and her family. Maya endured it all in silence, just as she always had. But inside, she was terrified. She had never performed in front of anyone except her grandmother. The thought of standing on a stage with hundreds of eyes watching her made her feel sick every night. She would sit at her piano and practice. Not because she needed to improve, her playing was already perfect, but because the piano was the only thing that calmed her nerves. When her fingers touched the keys, all her fears disappeared. There was just her and the music, nothing else. Her grandmother would sit nearby, listening with closed eyes and a peaceful smile. These moments were precious to both of them. They were their escape from the hardships of daily life. One evening, Maya asked her grandmother about her mother. It was a question she rarely asked because she knew it brought pain. But something about the upcoming performance made her want to understand her past better. The grandmother was quiet for a long time. Then she began to talk. She told Maya that her mother had also been a talented musician. She had played the violin beautifully and had dreams of becoming a professional performer. But life had been cruel to her. She had faced rejection and disappointment until she could not take it anymore. One day, she simply left, unable to handle the weight of her broken dreams. Maya listened carefully. She wondered if she had inherited her gift from her mother. She wondered if her mother ever thought about her. Most importantly, she wondered if she would end up the same way, crushed by a world that did not appreciate her talent. Her grandmother seemed to read her thoughts. She took Maya's hands and looked into her eyes. She told Maya that she was different. She was stronger than her mother had been. Whatever happened at the talent show, she would survive it. And no matter what, her grandmother would always be proud of her. The night before the talent show, Maya could not sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that could go wrong. What if she forgot how to play? What if her fingers froze? What if everyone laughed at her? The fears circled in her mind like dark clouds. Finally, she got up and walked to the piano. She sat down and began to play softly, so as not to wake her grandmother. The music wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Slowly, her fears faded away. She realized that no matter what happened tomorrow, she would always have this. She would always have her music. And that was enough. The morning of the talent show arrived with gray skies and a cold wind that seemed to cut right through you. Maya woke up early, before the sun had fully risen, and found her grandmother already in the kitchen making breakfast. The old woman had prepared something special, pancakes with honey, a rare treat they could barely afford. She wanted Maya to start the day with something good in her stomach. They ate together in comfortable silence, the way they often did. Words were not always necessary between them. After breakfast, Maya went to her room to get ready. She opened her small closet and looked at the few clothes hanging there. Everything was old and worn. She had nothing appropriate for a performance. Her grandmother appeared at the door, holding something wrapped in tissue paper. She handed it to Maya with trembling hands. Maya unwrapped it carefully and gasped. Inside was a beautiful blue dress, simple but elegant. The grandmother explained that she had been saving money secretly for months. She had bought this dress because she always knew a day like this would come. Maya's eyes filled with tears. She hugged her grandmother tightly. Unable to express her gratitude in words, when Maya arrived at school, she barely recognized the auditorium. It had been transformed for the event. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, decorations hung from the ceiling, and a large banner welcomed the special guest. Mr. Harrison, students and parents were streaming in, their chatter filling the space with nervous energy. Maya found a quiet corner backstage where the performers were waiting. She recognized some faces from her classes, but nobody approached her. She was still the strange girl nobody talked to. Mrs. Patterson rushed around, checking on everything and everyone. When she saw Maya, her face broke into a relieved smile. She told Maya she looked lovely in her dress. Then she handed her the program for the show. Maya scanned through the list of performers. There were singers, dancers, a magic act, and several instrument players. Her name was at the very end. Mrs. Patterson explained that she wanted to save the best for last. Maya nodded, though the thought of waiting through the entire show made her anxiety worse. The auditorium filled up quickly. By the time the show was about to start, every seat was taken. Mr. Robert Harrison sat in the front row, surrounded by the principal and other important people from the town. He was a large man with gray hair and expensive clothes. His face was serious, showing no emotion as he waited for the performances to begin. Maya watched him from behind the curtain, trying to guess what kind of person he was. Would he appreciate her music? Or would he dismiss her like everyone else always did? The talent show began. A group of girls sang a popular song, their voices slightly off-key but full of enthusiasm. The audience clapped politely. Then came a boy who performed magic tricks that everyone had seen 100 times before. More polite applause. One by one, the performers took the stage, did their acts, and left. Some were better than others, but none were exceptional. Maya could see Mr. Harrison's expression growing bored. He checked his watch several times. The principal looked nervous, probably wondering if this whole event was a waste of the businessman's time. As the show went on, something unexpected happened. A group of 3 girls approached Maya backstage. They were known as the popular girls, the ones who always wore the nicest clothes and looked down on everyone else. Their leader was a girl named Brittany, whose father was the richest man in Millbrook after Mr. Harrison. Brittany had a cruel smile on her face as she stood in front of Maya. She told Maya that she did not belong here. She said that someone like Maya, poor and strange, would only embarrass the whole school in front of Mr. Harrison. She suggested that Maya should leave now and save herself the humiliation. The other 2 girls laughed. Maya felt her heart sink. She wanted to run away, to disappear, to forget this whole thing. But then she remembered her grandmother's face that morning, the hope in her eyes, the sacrifice she had made for that blue dress. Maya could not let her down. She looked directly at Brittany and said nothing. Her silence seemed to confuse the popular girl, who had expected tears or an argument. After a moment, Brittany rolled her eyes and walked away, muttering something about wasting her time. Maya took a deep breath and tried to steady her racing heart. She could not let mean words defeat her. She had survived worse things in her life, the show continued. A boy played guitar while singing a love song he had written himself. It was actually quite good, and the audience gave him a warm response. Then came the final act before Maya. It was Brittany herself who was going to play piano. Maya watched from the wings as Brittany walked onto the stage in an expensive designer dress. She sat at the grand piano that the school had rented for the occasion and began to play a classical piece. Her technique was decent, clearly the result of years of private lessons with the best teacher's money could buy. The audience applauded loudly when she finished. Brittany took a bow with a satisfied smile, glancing backstage to make sure Maya had seen her performance, and now it was Maya's turn. Mrs. Patterson came to get her, whispering words of encouragement. Maya's legs felt weak as she walked toward the stage. The lights were bright, blinding her for a moment. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her as she made her way to the piano. The audience murmured. Some people recognized her as the quiet girl from Pine Street. Others wondered who she was. A few even laughed at her simple dress compared to Brittany's glamorous outfit. Maya sat down at the piano and looked at the keys. They were white and clean, not yellow like her piano at home. For a moment, panic seized her. This was not her instrument. This was not her safe space. She did not belong here. She glanced at the audience and saw her grandmother sitting in the back row, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. Their eyes met, and her grandmother gave her a small nod. That was all Maya needed. She closed her eyes and placed her fingers on the keys. The auditorium fell silent. Everyone was waiting. Maya took one last breath and began to play. She had chosen to perform Liszt La Campanella, one of the most technically demanding pieces in the entire piano repertoire. From the very first note, something changed in the room. The air itself seemed to shift. People who had been whispering stopped mid-sentence. Those who had been bored suddenly sat up straight. Even Mr. Harrison, who had been checking his phone, put it down and stared at the stage. The music that poured from Maya's fingers was unlike anything these people had ever heard. It was not just technically perfect. It was alive. Every note carried emotion, telling a story of joy and sorrow, hope and despair. Maya played with her eyes still closed, completely lost in the music. Her small hands moved across the keys with impossible speed and precision. The piece had passages that were so fast and complex that many professional pianists avoided playing it in public. But Maya executed them flawlessly, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. In the audience, people had stopped breathing. Some had tears streaming down their faces without knowing why. Even the children, who usually got bored during classical performances, were completely captivated. This was not just a talent show performance. This was something magical, something that happened once in 100 years. And it was happening right here in the auditorium of a small-town school that nobody had ever heard of. The final notes of La Campanella faded into silence. Maya sat motionless at the piano, her hands still hovering over the keys. For a moment, nothing happened. The auditorium was completely still, as if everyone had forgotten how to move. Then, like a wave breaking on the shore, the audience erupted. People jumped to their feet, clapping and cheering. Some were crying openly. Others were shouting words of praise. The applause was so loud that it shook the walls of the old building. Maya opened her eyes, startled by the noise. She had been so deep in her music that she had forgotten where she was. Now, seeing hundreds of people standing and clapping for her, she felt overwhelmed. This was nothing like what she had expected. She had prepared herself for polite applause, maybe some confused looks. Not this, never this. She stood up slowly, her legs shaking, and gave a small bow. The applause only grew louder. In the front row, Mr. Harrison was on his feet like everyone else. But unlike the others, he was not just clapping. He was staring at Maya with an intensity that was almost frightening. His businessman's mind was already calculating what he had just witnessed. He had attended concerts at the finest halls in the world. He had heard the greatest pianists of his generation perform. And yet this 12-year-old girl from his forgotten hometown had moved him in a way he had not experienced in decades. This was not just talent. This was genius. Mrs. Patterson rushed onto the stage, tears streaming down her face. She hugged Maya tightly, not caring about professional boundaries. She kept saying over and over that she had known from the moment she heard Maya play in that little house. The principal joined them, shaking Maya's hand and congratulating her. Other teachers crowded around. Students who had never spoken to Maya before were now trying to get close to her. The quiet, invisible girl had suddenly become the center of attention. Through the crowd, Maya spotted her grandmother making her way toward the stage. The old woman was crying too, but her face was glowing with joy. When she finally reached Maya, she held her granddaughter's face in her wrinkled hands and looked at her with so much love that Maya thought her heart might burst. No words were needed between them. They had been through so much together, and now, finally, something wonderful was happening. The celebration was interrupted by a deep voice. Mr. Harrison had made his way to the stage and was asking to speak with Maya privately. The principal quickly arranged for them to use his office. Maya followed the businessman, with her grandmother and Mrs. Patterson coming along. She did not know what to expect. Part of her was still waiting for something to go wrong, for someone to tell her this had all been a mistake. In the principal's office, Mr. Harrison sat down and studied Maya carefully. He asked her questions about her background, her training, her education. Maya answered honestly, telling him about growing up with her grandmother, about the old piano, about learning by herself. With each answer, Mr. Harrison's amazement seemed to grow. He had assumed Maya must have had some formal training that she was hiding. The idea that she was entirely self-taught seemed impossible. He asked Maya to play something else, something she had never played before. There was a radio on the principal's desk. Mr. Harrison turned it on and scanned through stations until he found one playing classical music. A complex piano piece was in the middle of playing. He asked Maya to listen carefully. When the piece ended, he asked if she could play what she had just heard. Maya nodded and went to the piano that stood in the corner of the office. An old upright that was mostly used for decoration. She played the piece perfectly. Note for note, as if she had been practicing it for months, Mr. Harrison's face went pale. He had tested many young musicians in his life, looking for scholarship candidates. He had never seen anything like this. This was not just a good ear or quick learning. This was something that science could not fully explain. Maya had what experts called perfect pitch and photographic musical memory, abilities that were extremely rare and could not be taught. Mr. Harrison made a decision on the spot. He told Maya that he wanted to sponsor her education at the best music conservatory in the country. He would pay for everything: tuition, housing, living expenses, and even bring her grandmother along if she wished. Maya's grandmother gasped and grabbed a chair for support. Mrs. Patterson began crying again. Maya herself stood frozen, unable to process what she was hearing. The businessman explained further. He had connections in the music world. He knew teachers, conductors, and producers. He believed Maya had the potential to become one of the greatest pianists of her generation, maybe of the century. But she needed proper training and exposure. Millbrook could not give her that. She needed to go to the city, to study with masters, to perform in real concerts. He wanted to make all of that happen. Maya looked at her grandmother, seeking guidance. The old woman's eyes were shining with tears and hope. She nodded slowly, giving Maya permission to accept. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. The thought of leaving Millbrook, of changing their quiet life, was terrifying. But she knew this was what Maya deserved. Her granddaughter had a gift that needed to be shared with the world. Keeping her hidden in this small town would be like keeping a bird in a cage. Maya turned to Mr. Harrison and said yes. The word came out barely louder than a whisper, but it changed everything. Mr. Harrison smiled for the first time since arriving in Millbrook. He shook Maya's hand and told her that she would not regret this decision. He promised to take care of all the arrangements and contact her grandmother. Within the week, when they finally left the principal's office, the hallway was crowded with people wanting to congratulate Maya. Students who had ignored her for years were now acting like her best friends. Teachers who had never noticed her were praising her brilliance. Even Brittany was there, looking pale and shocked, unable to believe what had happened. Maya moved through the crowd in a daze, holding her grandmother's hand tightly. Outside the school, the cold November wind hit Maya's face, bringing her back to reality. She took a deep breath and looked up at the gray sky. Everything was about to change. The life she had known, the quiet evenings at her piano, the simple routines with her grandmother, all of it would be different now. She did not know if she was ready. She did not know if she would succeed or fail in this new world she was entering. But for the first time in her life, she felt something she had never allowed herself to feel before. She felt hope. Her grandmother squeezed her hand and told her it was time to go home. They walked together down the familiar streets of Millbrook, past the shops they had visited 1,000 times, past the neighbors who now looked at them differently. Maya realized that she might not walk these streets much longer. Soon she would be far away in a big city full of strangers. The thought was both exciting and sad. When they reached their little house on Pine Street, Maya went straight to her piano. She sat down and ran her fingers over the yellowed keys, the keys that had been her companions for as long as she could remember. This old instrument had been her teacher, her friend, her escape. Whatever happened next, she owed everything to this piano and to the grandmother who had let her play it. She began to play a soft melody, something gentle and thankful. Her grandmother listened from the kitchen doorway, wiping tears from her eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new adventures. But tonight they were still together in their small house, and that was enough. 3 months had passed since the talent show that changed Maya's life. She was now living in a completely different world. The small house on Pine Street had been replaced by a comfortable apartment in the heart of the city. The old, yellowed piano was still in Millbrook. But now Maya practiced on a brand new grand piano that Mr. Harrison had provided. Her grandmother was with her, though the old woman often seemed lost in this new environment with its tall buildings and busy streets. Maya had been enrolled at the prestigious Anderson Music Conservatory, one of the top music schools in the entire country. The building was beautiful, with marble floors and high ceilings and practice rooms filled with the finest instruments. Students came from all over the world to study here. Their families were wealthy, their backgrounds privileged, their training extensive. Maya was the only scholarship student from a small town that nobody had heard of. She was also the youngest student in the advanced program. The first few weeks were overwhelming. Everything was new and strange. The teachers used terms and techniques that Maya had never heard of. The other students talked about competitions they had won and masters they had studied with. They wore expensive clothes and carried instruments that cost more than Maya's entire house in Millbrook. They looked at Maya with curiosity, sometimes with judgment, often with doubt. Who was this unknown girl who had appeared out of nowhere? How had she gotten into the advanced program without any formal training? Maya's main teacher was Professor Elena Volkov, a legendary pianist who had performed in concert halls around the world before retiring to teach. She was a stern woman with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. On Maya's first day, Professor Volkov asked her to play something. Maya chose the same piece she had performed at the talent show, La Campanella. She played it perfectly, just as she had in Millbrook. When she finished, she expected praise, maybe even amazement like she had received before. Instead, Professor Volkov looked at her coldly and said one word: adequate. Maya was stunned. No one had ever called her playing just adequate. Professor Volkov continued, explaining that technical perfection was only the beginning. Maya could hit all the notes correctly, but she played like a machine. There was no interpretation, no personal voice, no understanding of what the composer was trying to say. She had talent, immense talent, but talent without depth was meaningless. Maya felt tears forming in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She asked Professor Volkov what she should do. The old teacher's expression softened slightly. She told Maya that she would need to start from the beginning. Not learning notes and techniques, those she already had, but learning music itself, its history, its meaning, its soul. It would be hard work, harder than anything Maya had done before. But if she was willing to put in the effort, Professor Volkov would turn her from a talented player into a true artist. The months that followed were the most challenging of Maya's life. Professor Volkov pushed her relentlessly. She made Maya study music theory, composition, and history. She made her analyze scores note by note, understanding why composers made certain choices. She made Maya listen to recordings of great pianists from the past, studying their interpretations, their expressions, their unique voices. Most importantly, she made Maya dig deep into herself, finding her own emotions and learning to express them through the keys. At the same time, Maya struggled socially. The other students at the conservatory formed groups and friendships, but Maya remained on the outside. Her background was too different, her experiences too unfamiliar. She did not know how to talk about vacations in Europe or summers at music camps. She did not have stories about meeting famous musicians or attending prestigious competitions. When other students asked about her past, she did not know what to say. How could she explain the poverty, the loneliness, the old piano that had been her only companion? One student in particular made Maya's life difficult. His name was Julian Price, and he was considered the star of the conservatory. He came from a family of musicians, had been trained since childhood by the best teachers, and had already won several important competitions. Julian was handsome and charming, and everyone wanted to be his friend. But he was also arrogant and cruel, especially toward those he considered beneath him. From the moment Maya arrived, Julian saw her as a threat. He had always been the most talented student at the conservatory. Now there were whispers that this unknown girl from a small town might be even better. Julian could not accept this. He began a campaign to undermine Maya at every opportunity. He made comments about her clothes, her accent, her lack of proper training. He spread rumors that she was a fraud, that her talent show performance had been faked somehow. Maya tried to ignore Julian's attacks, but they wore her down. She had faced bullying before in Millbrook, but this was different. These were not just mean children making fun of her old shoes. These were talented musicians who looked down on her for not being one of them. Some days Maya wanted to give up. She would sit in her apartment missing her old life, missing the simplicity of playing alone in her grandmother's house. Her grandmother noticed her struggles. The old woman did not understand much about music or conservatories, but she understood her granddaughter. She would make Maya's favorite foods and sit with her in the evenings, providing silent comfort. She reminded Maya of why they had come here, of the opportunity that Mr. Harrison had given them. She told Maya that difficult times were tests, and Maya had passed every test life had thrown at her so far. One evening, Maya received unexpected news. Professor Volkov called her into her office and announced that Maya would perform at the conservatory's winter showcase. This was a major event where the best students demonstrated their progress to an audience of donors, critics, and talent scouts. Being selected was a great honor, especially for a first-year student. But it also meant intense pressure. Any mistake would be seen by everyone who mattered in the music world. Maya felt sick with anxiety. She asked Professor Volkov if she was ready. The old teacher looked at her with those sharp eyes and said something that Maya would never forget. She said that Maya had two choices. She could spend the next few weeks worrying about failure and probably guarantee it, or she could spend that time working harder than she ever had, pushing herself beyond her limits, and discovering what she was truly capable of. The decision was hers. That night, Maya made her choice. She would not let fear control her. She would not let Julian or anyone else make her doubt herself. She would practice until her fingers ached, study until her eyes burned, and prepare until she was ready to show everyone what a girl from Millbrook could do. She sat down at her piano and began to work on the piece Professor Volkov had assigned for the showcase. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. It was one of the most demanding pieces in the repertoire, requiring not just technical skill but deep emotional expression. For weeks, Maya barely slept. Every morning, she was at the piano before sunrise. Every night, she was still practicing when the city went dark. She analyzed every phrase, every dynamic, every tiny detail of the composition. She listened to dozens of recordings, taking notes on what she liked and what she did not. She experimented with her own interpretations, trying to find her unique voice within the music. Slowly, something began to change. The notes that had always come so easily started to mean something more. She was not just playing music anymore. She was speaking through it, expressing feelings she had never been able to put into words. Professor Volkov noticed the transformation. During their lessons, she began to smile more. She still pushed Maya hard, still demanded perfection. But there was a new respect in her eyes. She told Maya that she was finally beginning to understand what it meant to be an artist. The talent had always been there. Now the soul was emerging. The night of the winter showcase arrived faster than Maya expected. The conservatory's grand hall was filled with elegantly dressed guests, important people from the music industry, wealthy donors, critics from major publications, and scouts looking for the next great talent. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the audience. The stage held a magnificent concert grand piano that gleamed under the spotlights. Maya watched from backstage, her stomach twisted in knots. Other students performed first. They played beautifully, showcasing months of hard work and years of training. The audience applauded appreciatively after each performance. Julian Price played fourth, delivering a flawless rendition of Liszt that earned him a standing ovation from his section of supporters. As he walked off stage, he passed Maya and whispered something cruel, predicting that she would fail in front of everyone who mattered. Maya ignored him, focusing on controlling her breathing. Her grandmother was somewhere in the audience, sitting in the back because she felt uncomfortable among the wealthy guests. Mr. Harrison was there too, in the front row, watching carefully. He had invested a lot in Maya, not just money but reputation. If she failed tonight, it would reflect poorly on his judgment. Maya tried not to think about any of this. She tried to remember what Professor Volkov had taught her. The audience did not matter. The critics did not matter. Even the competition did not matter. All that mattered was the music and what she had to say through it. Maya's name was announced. She walked onto the stage, feeling every step like she was walking through deep water. The lights were blinding. The silence of the waiting audience was deafening. She reached the piano and sat down on the bench. Her hands were shaking slightly. She looked at the keys, so white and clean, waiting for her to give them voice. For a moment she felt paralyzed. All her fears came rushing back, the years of being invisible, the cruelty of other children, the doubt she had faced at every turn. Then she remembered something. She remembered her grandmother's face on the morning of the talent show, full of hope and love. She remembered her old piano with its yellowed keys, the only friend she had for so many years. She remembered why she played music in the first place, not for fame or money or approval, but because it was the only way she knew how to express what was inside her. She closed her eyes, placed her fingers on the keys, and began. The Rachmaninoff concerto opened with dramatic chords that seemed to shake the very air. But Maya was playing a solo arrangement, and she had modified it to begin differently, with a quiet, almost hesitant melody that gradually built in intensity. It was a risk, changing such a famous piece. Some purists might criticize her for it. But Professor Volkov had encouraged her to make the music her own, to tell her own story through it, and tell her story she did. Every note carried meaning. The soft passages spoke of loneliness and longing, of a little girl playing piano in an empty house while the world ignored her. The building crescendos expressed frustration and determination, the fight against poverty and prejudice. The thunderous climaxes released years of pain and struggle, transforming them into something beautiful. And the tender moments in between held love, the love of a grandmother who had sacrificed everything, the love of music that had saved Maya's life. The audience sat in stunned silence. This was not what they had expected. They had come to hear technical brilliance, clean execution, proper interpretation. What they were getting was something far more powerful. They were witnessing raw emotion translated into sound, a human soul laid bare through 88 keys. Some guests had tears rolling down their cheeks. Others had forgotten to breathe. Even the critics, hardened by years of hearing performances, found themselves moved in ways they could not explain. In the front row, Mr. Harrison watched with wide eyes. He had heard Maya play before at the talent show, but this was different. The girl he had discovered in Millbrook had grown into something extraordinary. He had invested in talent, and he was now seeing the emergence of true artistry. Nearby, Professor Volkov stood against the wall, her arms crossed, a rare smile on her usually stern face. Her student had exceeded every expectation. Maya reached the final section of the piece. Her fingers flew across the keys with impossible speed and precision, yet every note was infused with feeling. The music built to its ultimate climax, a cascade of sound that filled the grand hall and seemed to make the chandeliers shake. Then, with perfect control, she brought it down to the final quiet notes, a whisper of resolution, a gentle ending to an epic journey. The last chord faded into silence. For a moment, nothing happened. The audience sat frozen, still caught in the spell of what they had just experienced. Then, like a dam breaking, the applause exploded. Everyone rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even shouting with joy. It was not just polite appreciation. It was genuine emotion, gratitude for having witnessed something special. Maya opened her eyes, momentarily confused by the noise. She saw the standing ovation and felt overwhelmed. Her legs felt weak as she stood to bow. The applause continued, growing louder rather than fading. People were calling her name. In the back of the hall, she spotted her grandmother standing and crying, clapping her wrinkled hands together with all her strength. Backstage, the other students watched with mixed reactions. Some were genuinely impressed, recognizing that they had seen true greatness. Others were jealous, unable to accept that this outsider had outshone them all. Julian Price stood alone in a corner, his face pale with shock and anger. He had been the star of the conservatory. Now that title belonged to someone else. After the showcase, Maya was surrounded by people wanting to meet her. Critics introduced themselves, asking for interviews. Talent scouts handed her business cards, talking about concert opportunities. Donors offered additional support for her studies. It was all overwhelming for a girl who had spent most of her life being ignored. She smiled and nodded and shook hands, but her mind was elsewhere. Finally, she managed to break away and find her grandmother. The old woman was waiting patiently at the back of the hall, too shy to push through the crowd. When Maya reached her, they embraced tightly, holding on to each other as if afraid to let go. Her grandmother whispered in her ear, telling her how proud she was. How proud her grandfather would have been. How proud her parents would have been if they could see her now. Mr. Harrison approached them with a huge smile. He congratulated Maya enthusiastically and told her that her future was now unlimited. He spoke about record deals and concert tours and international competitions. Maya listened politely, but she felt strangely detached from all of it. She had achieved something tonight, something important. But deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome, more moments of doubt and fear. Professor Volkov appeared and asked to speak with Maya privately. They found a quiet corner away from the crowd. The old teacher looked at her student with something Maya had rarely seen in those sharp eyes, warmth and pride. She told Maya that tonight had been exceptional, but warned her not to let success go to her head. The music world was brutal. Tonight's triumph could become tomorrow's distant memory if Maya did not continue to work hard and grow as an artist. Maya nodded, taking the words seriously. She asked Professor Volkov what was next. The teacher smiled and said that Maya would perform at the National Young Artist Competition in 3 months. It was the most prestigious competition for musicians under 18 in the entire country. Winners went on to international fame and successful careers. It was the next step in Maya's journey. The night ended late. Maya and her grandmother took a taxi back to their apartment. The city lights blurred past the window. Her grandmother fell asleep on Maya's shoulder, exhausted from the emotional evening. Maya stayed awake, looking out at the streets, thinking about everything that had happened. 1 year ago, she had been a nobody in a forgotten town. Now she was being talked about as the next great pianist. It was almost too much to believe. When they got home, Maya helped her grandmother to bed and then sat down at her piano. She did not play anything in particular, just soft, random notes, letting her fingers wander. She thought about Millbrook, about her old house, about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about her mother, who had also been talented, who had also had dreams, but who had given up when things got hard. Maya promised herself that she would not make the same mistake. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them. She would keep playing. She would keep fighting. The city was quiet outside her window. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed briefly and then faded. Maya continued to play, her music mixing with the sounds of the night. Tomorrow would bring new pressures and new expectations. But right now, in this peaceful moment, she was exactly where she belonged, at her piano, making music, being herself. The National Young Artists Competition was held in a famous concert hall that Maya had only seen in photographs. The building was enormous, with towering columns and golden decorations that spoke of history and prestige. Musicians who had performed here had gone on to become legends. Now Maya would walk the same stage where they had stood, play on the same piano where they had created magic. The competition lasted 3 days. 40 of the most talented young musicians from across the country had gathered to compete for the top prize. Maya recognized some faces from the conservatory. Julian Price was there, of course, determined to prove himself after being overshadowed at the winter showcase. Other competitors came from famous music schools in different cities, each one carrying the hopes of their teachers and families. Maya felt the weight of expectations pressing down on her. The media had picked up her story, the unknown girl from a poor background who had risen to challenge the elite. Articles called her the Millbrook Prodigy and the Piano Cinderella. Some praised her natural talent. Others questioned whether she could really compete against musicians with years of formal training. Everyone was watching to see if she would succeed or crumble under pressure. The first round eliminated half the competitors. Maya played a Bach fugue and a Chopin etude, both flawlessly, but with the emotional depth that Professor Volkov had taught her. The judges gave her high marks, advancing her to the second round. Julian also advanced, as did several other talented players. The competition grew fiercer as the weaker musicians were cut. The second round required a longer program, showcasing range and versatility. Maya played pieces from different eras: Baroque, classical, romantic, and modern. She demonstrated not just technical ability but understanding of different styles and periods. Her interpretations were mature beyond her years, showing the intensive study she had done at the conservatory. When she finished, the audience gave her a warm ovation. She advanced to the final round with the top 5 competitors. The night before the finals, Maya could not sleep. She lay in her hotel bed staring at the ceiling, running through the piece she would play tomorrow. It was a Beethoven sonata, the Appassionata, one of the most emotionally intense works in the piano literature. Professor Volkov had chosen it specifically for Maya, believing it matched her personality and strengths. But playing it well required more than just hitting the right notes. It required bearing her soul in front of strangers. Around midnight, Maya gave up on sleep and went to the hotel lobby. She was surprised to find her grandmother there, sitting in an armchair, also unable to sleep. They sat together in comfortable silence for a while. Then her grandmother began to talk. She told Maya stories she had never heard before, stories about her mother's dreams, her father's kindness, her grandfather's love of music. She talked about the struggles their family had faced and the hope they had always carried. Finally, she told Maya something important. She said that whatever happened tomorrow, Maya had already won. She had escaped the limits that life had tried to place on her. She had proven that talent could come from anywhere, that poverty did not mean inferiority, that dreams were worth fighting for. Even if she did not win the competition, she had won something more valuable. She had won the right to be herself. Maya hugged her grandmother, drawing strength from her words. They sat together until the sky began to lighten outside the windows. Then they went back to their rooms to try to get a few hours of rest before the biggest day of Maya's life. The finals took place that evening. The concert hall was packed with music lovers, industry professionals, and media from around the world. The 5 finalists would perform in order determined by drawing, with Maya assigned the last position. She watched from backstage as her competitors played, each one delivering impressive performances. Julian went third and played brilliantly, earning enthusiastic applause from supporters he had brought to fill the audience. When the fourth competitor finished, Maya knew it was almost her turn. She closed her eyes and took deep breaths, centering herself. She thought about everything she had been through, the lonely childhood, the discovery at the talent show, the struggles at the conservatory, the long journey that had led to this moment. She thought about all the people who had believed in her. Her grandmother, Professor Volkov, Mrs. Patterson, even Mr. Harrison. She could not let them down. Her name was announced. She walked onto the massive stage, feeling smaller than ever against its grandeur. The piano waited for her under the spotlights, a magnificent instrument worth more than she could ever earn in a lifetime. She sat down on the bench and adjusted it slightly. She looked at the thousands of faces in the audience, a sea of expectation and judgment. Somewhere in that sea was her grandmother, believing in her with everything she had. Maya placed her fingers on the keys. The hall fell absolutely silent. And then she began to play. The Appassionata opened with dramatic intensity, and Maya matched its passion with her own. Every phrase was shaped with meaning, every dynamic carefully controlled, every transition seamless and natural. She was not just playing Beethoven's music. She was living it, breathing it, becoming one with it. The audience disappeared from her awareness. The competition disappeared. There was nothing but her and the piano and the timeless conversation they were having. The piece moved through its three movements, each one building on the last. Maya navigated the technical challenges with ease that seemed impossible. The fiery runs, the thunderous chords, the delicate passages all came together perfectly. But it was not the perfection that moved people. It was the humanity. Maya was telling her story through Beethoven's notes, transforming centuries-old music into something personal and immediate. The final movement built to its shattering climax. Maya's hands moved faster and faster, driving the music toward its inevitable conclusion. The sound filled the hall, overwhelming the senses. And then, with one last powerful chord, it was over. Maya sat motionless, her hands hovering above the keys. The last echoes fading into silence. The reaction was instantaneous and overwhelming. The entire audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering with genuine emotion. People were crying, strangers hugging each other, overcome by what they had experienced. Maya stood and bowed, her own eyes wet with tears. In that moment she knew. Whatever the judges decided, this was her victory. The results were announced an hour later. The 5 finalists stood on stage, waiting for their fate. The presenter opened the envelope and called the winner. Maya's name echoed through the hall. She had done it. She had won the National Young Artists Competition. Chaos erupted around her. People rushed to congratulate her. Cameras flashed from every direction. Reporters shouted questions. Through it all, Maya searched for one face. She found her grandmother being helped onto the stage by Mr. Harrison. The old woman was crying and laughing at the same time. They held each other tightly. 2 people from a forgotten town standing at the center of the music world. In the years that followed, Maya's star continued to rise. She performed at the greatest concert halls in the world. From New York to Vienna to Tokyo, critics praised her as the pianist of her generation. Audiences adored her for the emotion she brought to every performance. She never forgot her roots. She established scholarships for talented children from poor backgrounds, giving them the opportunities that Mr. Harrison had given her. Her grandmother lived long enough to see Maya's first international tour. She passed away peacefully in her sleep, a smile on her face, photos of Maya's achievements surrounding her bed. Maya grieved deeply, but found comfort in knowing that her grandmother had seen her dreams come true. She had fulfilled the promise she never spoke but always felt. To justify every sacrifice her grandmother had made, Maya often returned to Millbrook, visiting the old house on Pine Street that she had bought and preserved. The yellowed piano still stood in the corner, and sometimes she would play it, remembering where everything had begun. The neighbors who used to ignore her now spoke of her with pride. The school that had barely noticed her displayed her photographs prominently. The town that had given her nothing but hardship was now famous only because of her, but fame and success were not what mattered most to Maya. What mattered was the music itself, the ability to express emotions that words could not capture, the power to move people and connect with them across all boundaries. She had been given an extraordinary gift, and she used it to bring beauty into the world. That was her true purpose, and she embraced it with all her heart. On quiet evenings, when she was alone with her piano, Maya would sometimes think about the day Mrs. Patterson had asked her to play a simple tune at the school talent show. That one moment had changed everything. She had been told to play something easy, something that would not embarrass anyone. Instead, she had revealed what she truly was, not just a talented girl, but a prodigy whose music could touch the soul. She had shown the world that greatness could come from the most unexpected places, that poverty could not suppress genius, and that a simple request could unlock an extraordinary destiny. The little girl from Pine Street had become a legend, and her music would echo through time, inspiring generations to come, proving that dreams were always worth believing in.